Hello, welcome to another episode of the Project Purple podcast. I'm Dino Varelli, founder and CEO of Project Purple. And today we're back in the podcast studio. It's been a busy week in the podcast studio, and I'm excited to have another special guest with us here on the podcast. Coming to us, I should say two guests. It was supposed to be one guest, and then we got a good surprise. But I've got two very special guests coming to us all the way from the Pittsburgh area, about an hour and a half north of Pittsburgh, Julie and Joe Carroll. Thank you for joining us here on the Project Purple podcast on audio and also on video.
Thank you. Nice to meet you again, Dino.
Nice to meet you.
Well, as I said before we hit record, we're going to hand the mic over to you guys here in a second to share your journey. I always kind of tee it up a little bit and share with our audience how we connected. You're currently fighting pancreatic cancer. We found you on social media, and I've said this many times, and not to sound like a broken record, but I've said this many times on the podcast. Social media can be a very toxic place right now. We won't go down that rabbit hole, but we have always tried to find the positive in it. And the one thing that I have to say over the 4+ years of this podcast is we have found so many amazing, wonderful people on social media willing to share their journeys, which I think is just so powerful. Because you guys don't have to do this. You don't have to share what you're doing coming here on the podcast, but also in your own personal lives of, social media and putting it out there for the public. And, whether it's a news station, an organization, or a group like us asking you to come on to share your story is so powerful, but we wouldn't have that without social media. So I always try to look at the positives versus the negatives. So thank you guys for allowing us the opportunity and for putting your story out there on social media.
Thank you for having us.
No, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. It's honestly my pleasure here. So with that, we're going to hand over the mic to you guys here. And as I said, before we hit record, this is your opportunity to share with our guests, who Julie Carrol is and what you've been going through and what brings you here today in terms of your journey with pancreatic cancer. So with that, the mic is yours, Julie and John.
All right. Thank you. Hi, I'm Julie. Again, this is my husband, Joe. I was diagnosed in January with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, adenocarcinoma. It had metastasized to my liver, and also I had tumors in my peritoneum. Let's rewind a little bit. I had no idea, obviously, that this was going on, like so many people with pancreatic cancer, unfortunately. About a year ago, we had taken a trip to New Orleans. I had gotten a sandwich that didn't agree with me, I thought. And later on that night, I was, so to speak, giving it back. It wasn't good. And we never thought anything of it after that. Summer came and went last year, and it was about September of 2021. I was complaining to Joe about me being so bloated. Like my stomach was just insanely bloated. It was like I was almost 9 months pregnant. And I kept complaining about it, but I wasn't gaining any weight. Like, I'm going to have to get a bigger pair of pants. I'm not gaining any weight. What in the world's going on? And, I just thought, well, I'm 45 years old. I'm getting a little bit older. Maybe menopause is coming. Just trying to find some kind of reasoning behind everything. Then about October, November area, I started getting really bad back pain and really gut-wrenching pain in my abdomen. Again, not thinking the worst of anything. I'm like, I'll just make an appointment with my doctor here in a couple of weeks, see if it goes away. It could be, I was thinking maybe IBS, something like that. And it came and went. So whenever I felt better, I'm like, oh, I don't need to go to the doctor. One thing I did notice whenever all of this was going on, I'm going to get a little personal here. My habits in the bathroom had changed. About 7 years ago, I had my gallbladder out, and that changed. If you've ever had your gallbladder out, that really changes everything going on in there. Whenever this all started happening, my habits had changed dramatically. And that's really what prompted me to go to the doctor. It was the pain and then the change in my bowel habits. And whenever I went to the doctor, again, she was just kind of like, oh, maybe it's a food allergy or IBS. We'll give you some scans and see what was going on. Well, then in January of this year, I had gone, and fortunately enough, my husband Joe here was able to do my CT scans, and we found out then that it was not IBS and it was not anything with food allergies. It was a very large tumor in my pancreas of the tail. Like I said, it went to my liver and my peritoneum.
Her symptoms were very mild and they were on and off. So she didn't, it's like everybody else, when you get one little feeling, you don't run to the doctor. What prompted her to go was there was a 2-week period that's towards the middle of December. And it got much worse very quickly. And that was, I said, you have to go. And she had went to the doctor and she was to have a colonoscopy and it got rescheduled due to a lot of circumstances. And when she finally did go, she was definitely not, absolutely not brushed off. They took it very seriously and they said, you need to go for a CAT scan now. So, it was her going to the doctor, on her own accord, of course, being prompted by me to say, yeah, you've got to get this checked out. And that was when she ended up, of course, everything, how it goes, you have to schedule things. So there was the little delays, but the thing about it is that struck me from doing what I do was I've seen people very sick. I've seen people not so sick that have things like this. And never in all the years that I've been doing this did I think anything like this was going on with her. Her symptoms would come and go so quickly and off and on, but it was until that persistent, and it was a rapid change. Like she said, with her bowel habits, it was like flipping a switch.
Yeah.
And I guess with pancreatic cancer, it's usually the other way around. That switch is usually flipped the other way. Hers was the opposite, which was kind of strange. And that's when she went and we found the problem, obviously.
Yeah. About how the doctors were asking me what my symptoms were, if I was throwing up or if I had diarrhea, constipation, anything like that. To that matter, I never once threw up. I never once had any type of upset stomach in that respect. I still have my appetite, and I still continue. Even I'm into my treatment. 9 treatments into it. 6 months into everything, and I'm doing fairly well with it. The only problems I could really complain about is the cold sensations and the neuropathy, but that's a drop in the bucket as to what others endure. I'm very fortunate in that respect.
I want to take a pause here and go back, because you mentioned something that was very interesting, at least for me, was that you said 7 years ago you had your gallbladder removed.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to play doctor here or second guess anything, but at that time, did they give you, were you having like gallstones or having attacks, or was there another health issue going on that, in hindsight, of course, is 2020, right? Like we can look back at these things, but what was the reason for that being removed back then?
I was having attacks. I had no gallstones. Just every time I ate something, fried foods or fatty foods, I would get like a gallbladder attack, and I had testing done and
biliary dyskinesia.
All right. So then now, currently, you get diagnosed. You're in treatment. You're now 9 cycles through.
Yes.
And the chemotherapy that you're on, I believe you said prior to recording, was FOLFIRINOX.
Yes. I went 7 treatments in with the full dosage of it. Again, really no issues, no side effects other than my platelets were low one time. So we had to opt and not do treatment that week. And that was pretty cool because we went to Aruba anyhow. So I got some sun and, you know, had some downtime, come back and everything was looking much better with my platelets and whatnot. But then they did reduce the dosage of some of the drugs just so my platelets would stay in check and not wear me out so much. But yeah, I just got my pump off yesterday, so I'm like really excited today.
So today's a good day, right? Usually
it's a very good day, yeah.
The first or second day after the chemo pump, you have that good, you feel great, and then it crashes pretty hard.
Yeah, sometimes, mainly whenever my body tells me to nap, I ain't gonna fight it anymore. I'm old, so I'm just gonna nap. I have time to do other things. That's not a problem. I can nap for 20 minutes.
Going back to, and this is a loaded question here, but I know you mentioned the gallbladder. Any history of any other issues that, and again, hindsight's always 2020. Right. I know I don't know if you've gone down that road. I hope you haven't. I know some people do, where they look back at like, oh man, I should have recognized this earlier. Nothing that you can speak to?
Not really. I mean, we sat there and thought and racked our brains for everything possible. You know, what could we have done differently? Did we do something, or did I do something that was, you know, wrong? And I'm sure everybody questions that. And then it's just to the point, does it even matter? We're here now, so we got to move forward instead of looking back at anything. Even my family has no history of cancer. We have a bigger history of heart disease than anything. And that's how I figured, you know, things were going to happen and go with me is my heart. And here, my organs had a different route to take, I guess, so to speak.
Yeah, and when you were explaining like symptoms, so I mean, it's so crazy, and thank you for doing that, because I think, you know, it's powerful for our audience to hear, because like you're saying, all right, so like super bloated, like my, you know, not to put anyone on the spot, but I know many females, like after they eat certain foods, they get bloated. Like I even get bloated when I eat certain foods digestively. I think anyone listening probably has that same problem, right?
Definitely, yeah.
And then you look back, and this is like the frustrating thing with this disease, because we talk about early detection a lot. But then when you look at the signs and symptoms, like you were saying, like, yeah, you're having back pain and abdominal pain, but it would go away. And again, having your gallbladder out, I had my gallbladder out back in 2000 and late 2018, early 2019, I think, or late 2018. So I know when you said that, like how that is, because like certain foods just don't sit well anymore. Like I can't eat the way I used to eat back in 2018 today. So like to have those kind of, I wouldn't say like the aches and pains that come and go, like you don't think anything of it.
No.
But when your GI and your bowel movements change, and when you said like the doctor said, well, it's like IBS, like that really enrages me, because I feel, you know, this is kind of where, okay, I'll talk a little bit about us here for a second. Like us as an awareness group, we have to work with these clinicians to be better, to recognize these signs, and to maybe have a checklist, like rule out, okay, IBS, yes, but maybe there is an indication with pancreatic cancer. And I've had many people on the podcast. I just had a lady from the UK who is rolling out a campaign. She had a very similar situation where her poo, as she called it, because that's what they call it in the UK, was not right. And so she was calling it poo in the loo, like, you know your poo in the loo.
Yeah.
You know, and that's kind of an indicator of maybe what's going on, or it should be an indication of, again, having this checklist. Is it IBS? Is it pancreatic cancer? Is it something else? You know, is it colon cancer, or is it something going on in the colon? And, you know, just remembering there's been quite a few guests that we've had that got diagnosed that way because of those bowel symptoms. So I appreciate you. I know it's not easy to talk about that. You know, no one wants to talk about their GI, right?
Everybody does it though. So
yeah, but see, this is the crazy thing. Like, I know we're laughing here, but like, we all do it, right? Like, everyone has those movements, whether you want to admit it or not. I don't care. But how critical this is to like understanding your body, right? Like, something's not right. Like, so if you realize, you know, this is all on, you know, compliments to you guys and kudos to you guys for realizing like, hey, this is not right. And you have to continue to advocate for yourself, which frustrates me because as an awareness group, like the experts should be better. Like the system should be better to pick that stuff earlier on, or to have that checklist. Maybe that's what we need to do, is we need to advocate to GPs to have a checklist. Like, if someone comes in with crazy bowel movements, or they know something's not going on right with their GI tract, like, here's your checklist: IBS, pancreatic cancer, colon issues, diverticulitis, dietary, you know, gluten, celiac disease, possibly, you know, anything that impacts the bowel tract that causes these GI issues. This should be like the standard of care, where you have a checklist and you check them all off, or you go through the testing. And I know we don't have early detection, but you gotta kind of have to rule everything out, right?
Oh yeah.
So thank you for sharing that, because that's you know, for our audience listening and watching, that is so critical to hear that. And again, we all do it, but I don't think anyone wants to talk about it.
Oh no, and I agree. Whenever I first got diagnosed, I laid in bed every night for, I bet you, almost 2 months. I told all of our family and friends and everything, but, you know, we live in a world of social media. We had talked about that before, you know, we hit record, and it's always a downer to read things on social media. But I sat there for 2 months in bed, laying awake, thinking, nobody ever talks about it. Nobody ever comes out and says, because they don't want to be that person that says, I have cancer. You know what? It's okay. It's okay to come out and say that. And there's other people out there that will then reach out to you and say, you know, I had cancer too. And that's what happened to me whenever I come out and said it on Facebook, and did, you know, just kind of told my journey in a huge paragraph. I had people reaching out to me that I've known since I was little, that I did not know that they had cancer, and maybe breast cancer, melanoma, things to that effect. And I'm like, sitting here thinking, why doesn't anybody ever talk about this? It's nothing to be ashamed about. It's like you had said, we need to raise awareness to this. We need to scream it from the mountaintops. There's more out there than what anybody is aware of after you step into the world of cancer, or of any unfortunately medical thing. I'm rambling, but because I'm very passionate about it. I am very passionate about raising awareness and getting it out there, and having people take care of themselves, be their own advocate, listen to their own body, and stand up. And if something was not right, go and get a second, third, fourth opinion. Step out of your comfort zone and say something.
Do you think, Julie, and so this is the question, and this is a loaded question. I have a lot of loaded questions, by the way, which I'll say. Do you think that's something that, or let me phrase it this way. Was there a point in this journey that you realized that, as you said, you were sitting in bed, or was this something that you can look back at, another experience that said, hey, this is why I have to be like this going into this?
I mean, you bring that up, you know. We had a son who was born with a heart condition called tetralogy of Fallot. And whenever I gave birth, I did not know anything was wrong up until about 8 hours after Aiden was born. And we were rushed down to Pittsburgh Children's Hospital and found out that he had this heart issue. And like I said, a door of or I don't know what I want to say, opened up to us. Yeah, it's a new world opened up to us. And we learn a lot about different things that you don't want to know about, you, I'm rambling again. You learn what you're able to take and what you're able to stand up for, and I don't know, help me out.
All right, I'm asking if you can hear me. Okay, it was a very public ordeal. Aiden was in six months in children's and never left the cardiac intensive care unit. And so we spent 6 months there. We never got to bring him home. He had a lot of complications post-op. The surgery, his tetralogy was very severe. Plus, he had some other issues with pulmonary hypertension after his first open heart. So he had subsequently had 2 other open hearts, and then it developed chylothorax, I guess is, in essence, pockets of fluid in his lungs. So that did not go well. But on that journey, we were very public. We did daily posts too. At the time, it was care pages. Blogs were new. This was back in 2008, and so we were very public with people. We wanted people to know what we were going through, because I will not lie, that's not my specialty. Pediatric care is not something we do a lot where I work. So when we were told he had tetralogy of flow, neither one of us had ever heard of it. We did not know anything. I had ever heard of it. So when we started going through this, we went through this sort of with everyone, and it became very popular for us to do. People would say, "Hey, you didn't post today. What's going on? Where's your update?" And it was a nice way to connect with people. And like she's saying, with that experience, when this came about, the first discussion we had was, how public are we going to be with this? Can we go through this? Do we have the strength to do that again, where everyone knows everything? And in short, the answer was yes and no. There are things that we know now after that experience. There are things that people need to keep to themselves, but they're not because of not wanting to share information, because a lot of people jump to conclusions. When you say stage 4 metastatic pancreatic disease, I don't know how many of the listeners have experienced this, or their significant others. The look on people's faces when you tell them that, to be blunt, they almost put her in the ground, because they heard so many times the stigma that pancreatic cancer has is that it's a death sentence, and that's not the way we want to look at it. And
that's the way it shouldn't be looked at.
It should not be looked at that. It should not be looked at in that way or in that light. So Julie and I know her driving thing was to not be that way, to not let people think that. And it was, I guess that's, her and I have talked about this at length. It's not me speaking for her. This is her and me putting it in words, I guess.
Yeah.
We didn't want to share every little detail, because people don't need to know every little detail. However, the people going through this, it's important for there to be a platform where they can share the experience, like you said, right down to the who. That's important for the people going through it. For me, important for me to deal with Julie. For Julie, it's important for her to hear from other people, because those little changes that they see that she might be able to relate to are not things that I talk about, because for me, a little change here and there is nothing. For someone with pancreatic cancer that's on treatment, it is a big deal. It can mean the difference of, do I go to the doctor today or don't I call the doctor? So that experience helped us to have a better grasp of how to handle this situation, and who needs to know what, I guess.
Well, what you guys, what Joe just said for Julie and Joe there was so powerful. And I just want to sit on this topic for a second, or for as long as we want, I should say. Joe, you said something, overcoming the stigma of when someone says I'm stage 4, and people look at that person or they say, oh my, right? Or, oh God, yeah. Right? And we've had this talk recently, the survival rate's 11%. That's not zero. And I feel, and the discussion came up recently where doctors, and now I'll bring it back to my own personal experience with my dad. Like, I remember my dad when he was re-diagnosed, because originally he was stage like 2A, had the Whipple, and then 6 months chemo, 3 months, no evidence of disease, and then stage 4 back. And at the time, the doctor said, what do you want to do? You have X amount of time. And I was thinking back, I look back and I'm like, and I'm not trying to beat up on doctors here because the general public does this. What's to say that you're not part of that 11%?
Exactly.
Right. Like,
exactly.
and I feel bringing it back to us, like an awareness group, like I think we do a really poor job as a whole. And I'll speak for everyone in this space, in the world, all the pancreatic cancer groups as well. And I know we have to try to raise awareness, right? So we use that statistic of like the 11%, that it is. And I'm not trying to sugarcoat anything. Like you guys are fighting it, this, right? But there's nothing out there that says you can't be part of that 11%. Like there's no acceptance, right? So like, how are you guys then, if you guys can or want to, how do you what are some of the things to share with the audience that how you overcome that stigma?
Whenever I was told that I was stage 4, I thought the worst of the worst, because no one ever told us what the different stages in cancer were. I had to Google it. I didn't know any of that. Well, then whenever I was explaining it to my family about, on stage 4, they looked at me like, oh my gosh, how much time do you have left? And I'm like, well, I didn't ask that. I'm not going to ask that. There's only one person who knows that, or one being who knows that. And he's up there and he's not going to give me that answer, even if I do ask him. So I explained to them, just because I'm stage 4, it just means it's just not in one location. And that kind of changed their idea of things. Because I was fortunate enough to be rescanned about a month and a half ago. My standard 3-month rescan, it showed that the chemo was working. My tumors had shrunk in my peritoneum, and the liver met was pretty well less visible. The tumor in my pancreas had shrunk also. So obviously I'm like ecstatic. This is awesome. This is working. And that, again, go out to social media and say, just because I'm stage 4 doesn't mean that the chemo, that's why you're going chemo. That's why you fight. You get it to be, no evidence of disease. It's going to take some time, but it didn't show up overnight. It's not going to go away overnight. You got to be strong. You got to continue to just, if you're feeling down, you got to flip it around and realize that you're still here. There's still some fight in there, and light that flame back up.
It's so powerful what you just said, Julie, because, and when you said it, I was like, wow. Like, I to hear you say that, when you said stage 4 just means that it's not there's not just one tumor, right? And if we think about that, it's such a simple response, but it also, like, in my mind, and I've been doing this 12 years, I'm like, damn, man, you're right. Like, that's how you look at it. And that doesn't mean the other thing, right? So like, if we, and I guess my point here is, if we all take this mind shift and how we look at things and shift it, and you take out what the other side is saying and you focus your attention there, it's wild, like, what that can happen in your mind and how you look at that and how you feel. Like, when you said that, I was like, wow, that's all. Like, I had this, like, like, this is good. Right? Like,
I'm Joe has been my rock during all of this. Whenever I got down and negativity, of course, hit you. you're slammed upside the face with a diagnosis of cancer, and a very deadly cancer, and a very aggressive cancer. So he's sitting there saying, "Cool. Yes, we know that it is, but you know what? Let's move forward. What can we do to make it not as aggressive, not as deadly?" Like you said, 11%. I remember telling the doctors, "Remember my face and remember my name, because I will be in one of your medical journals who beat it." And I think they didn't listen.
I love that. I've never heard that, but I love that. I'm gonna share that with many people. Remember my face.
Yep.
I love that. I love it. That's awesome. I get a couple questions here. You mentioned Joe a lot. What has it been, and you mentioned your family, but is there things, and I'll preface this, we get this question a lot when people get diagnosed, neighbors, family members, what's the best thing that I can do for this person that just got diagnosed? So I always like asking the person going through it, what are some of the things that, whether it's Joe, friends, family, that have done for you during this time that have really meant the world to you or really made a difference?
Whenever I was first diagnosed, I told him, I said, "We're going to Nashville." I always wanted to go to Nashville, and a group of friends were going to begin with. So I'm like, "We're going." And whenever that happened, then more people got on board, and more people. And it was awesome just to see that people maybe didn't necessarily want to be around just me, but they wanted to go and celebrate going somewhere and celebrating life. And again, I had mentioned we went to then Aruba, because I always wanted to see Aruba. It was on my, I don't call it a bucket list anymore. I call it a dream list. So it was on my dream list to go to Aruba. And when we first got there, some of the locals had asked us, "What brings you to the island?" And my answer, without even thinking, I'm going to get choked up, I'm sorry, was life. Life brought us here. And for people to be around me and show me that there is still living to do, as opposed to, "Oh my gosh, you have cancer, you're dying." No, I want to see, I have cancer and I'm still alive. I want you to celebrate that with me. And that to me means the world. Don't look at us like we're dying, because honestly, we're all dying. Unfortunately, some before others, but again, nobody can tell you that. Nobody can give you your number when you're up. So celebrate every day, every hour, every week, as though you're celebrating life, not celebrating before death.
It's so powerful to hear you say that, Julie. I had something written down here because you mentioned, and this is just me listening, but you mentioned being in New Orleans, being in Nashville, being in Aruba in like less than a year. And, we haven't even talked about the pandemic, where we were told not to travel. But you guys have lived, and I have it written here. I put living life, traveling.
Yeah.
I commend you guys for doing that. And I know I asked the question before, overcoming the stigma. It wasn't said, but I think the one thing here that I've noticed in this short period of time, I mean, we've been recording almost 40 minutes here, is that you're living life. Like, yes. This cancer diagnosis, like, you're traveling. I mean, I know, and I'm not trying to put people to shame here, because I know some people, whether it's, physically or, whatever their bias is or whatever they believe or whatever someone's telling them, don't do those things. But man, you're living.
Yes. I'm not letting it get me down as much as I don't, as much as I can not let it get me down. We've always been travelers to begin with, and you go back to the pandemic, that kind of put a big a bench to everything.
I'm a traveler by default. I'm a traveler because she's a traveler. So I have been convinced to go on a number of these trips because of her. And in hindsight, you know, it was always me saying, no, we can't afford that. We have to do this. We need this done. We got to do this. And I don't want to go. I don't want to go. I don't want to take off work. And you're going. And there were times when I didn't go and she went with the girls and it's fine. That's good. Go. And she, in hindsight, you know, we're very fortunate that we get to do those things. We understand that not everyone has that opportunity. And we have made a lot of these things happen with the help of others. And we're very fortunate that we get to do those things. I'm very fortunate that she drugged me on all of those trips because looking back, I had this discussion last night with someone, or yesterday. I said, a lot of people plan for retirement. You know, the big thing now of everything with the economy, your 401k, and, you know, and you set up for retirement to live life after you retire. The best piece of advice after she drugged me on all these trips, don't forget to live life on your way to retirement. Don't just plan on that, because things can change very quickly, and you don't want to spend your time looking back saying, I really wish I would have. So now I don't have to say that because she forced me to go on all of those trips. I can say, yes, I had a wonderful time on all of those trips with her, and I was very fortunate to get to experience all of those things along with her, even though some of them were in duress.
I love it. I love it. I love it. My next question here for you, Julie, and I know you mentioned, you know, you're in your 9th treatment. So given the time of treatments you've had, and you said, hey, you've got a little bit of neuropathy, but is there anything, and then this is a loaded question as well, is there anything that you can kind of look to that said, hey, this has kind of really worked for me during this time? Meditation, yoga, reading, CBD, anything?
Tylenol.
Yeah, Tylenol.
Tylenol's been your friend.
Yeah. I would meditate some. I'm not a big reader other than Facebook, I have to say. So, you know, just sitting and laying there with your eyes closed and just, you know, being one with yourself and feeling everything in your body, and prayer, a lot of prayer. We've prayed. I think he might be getting tired of hearing all the stuff there. I hope not, because we got a lot of prayers sent from us, and a lot from family, friends, people who don't know us. God bless them. That's what's helped get us to where we're at, and I'm sure will get us to the end.
Powerful. Next question. Someone listening to this podcast that maybe just has a similar diagnosis. Maybe they just got it yesterday. They may get it tomorrow when this airs, or whenever this episode airs the next day. Is there a couple things or one piece of advice that you would give that person? And what would that be?
I giggle because this was one of the things that nobody told me, and I wish they would have. Fill out your calendar in pencil, because it's going to change every week, and be okay with that. That was one of the biggest things that I had issues with. I have a very type A personality, and my poor calendar has lines all through it. That one time I wasn't allowed to have treatment because my numbers were low. It just sent me into a tizzy. Nobody told me that well, I shouldn't say that. A lot of people told me that it was going to be okay, but I didn't believe them. You know, my world was falling around me. I had cancer. I just missed a treatment. What's going to happen next? And it all did work out. It all works out. But yeah, pencil in the calendar, not pen, not marker.
I love that. And, you know, we're like 200 plus episodes in. I don't even have a count, but the amount of survivors we've had, no one's ever mentioned that.
Really?
Yeah. So I like that is such, but that is so on point though. And it comes full circle, which we'll get to in a second. My last question, and this is a loaded question. There is no right or wrong to your answer to this. How do you, given your experience, what you've gone through, how do you define the word pancreatic cancer?
It's funny you say that because I've been listening to your podcast and I knew you were going to ask me. And it was Liam Holt that I just listened to yesterday. And I believe he said it best. He said it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. That hit home like, oh my gosh, it's not a death sentence. I know what pancreatic cancer is not. It is not a death sentence. It is not the end of the world. It's a game changer. It is I don't want to portray this the wrong way, but it kind of helped open up my eyes to a lot of things that you never saw before because you didn't need to. Prayer, God, family, friends. We all have them. We all rely on some form of each other. But when you get that diagnosis, you open up your world to a lot of other things and realize there's a lot of vibrant colors out there. It's not all black and white. It's not all highs and lows. There's some in the middle. Yeah, that's about it. Yeah, I said I could go on and on.
Well, I hearing you say that, Julie, and I'm going to sum this up. As I said, to go back to what you said in advice, your first stories and then listening to everything. And so it's kind of a unique position that I sit in as the interviewer, I guess, right? And asking you guys these questions. And as I've said many times, I don't know if our audience has probably ever heard this, but I don't have a script. And I know before we hit record, I said, hey, I don't have a script. We hand it off to the guest, whatever you say. Like, and yeah, the Define PC, okay, the cat's out of the bag. That's always going to be the last question, 90% of the time, depending on the guest. And there are a couple other questions that we've asked before on the podcast. But as the interviewer, and doing this multiple times, I tend to see kind of there's like an arc where people's lives are and where they've come from, what they've done, and how you guys, both you and Joe, have said many things here. But I come back to this most powerful thing, I think, was like, you guys both said this, like overcoming the stigma, right? And the words that you guys have chosen, the stories you guys have shared with our audience here, all kind of points back to that. And, you mentioned, the unfortunate circumstance that happened with your son. And how that prepared you here for this journey. And then the things that you've mentioned, just like the advice, like write it in pencil. Well, why? Because things change all the time. But that's how we overcome this stigma, right?
Yep.
And the traveling of living life. And then to define pancreatic cancer the way you did is so powerful. So, I just want to say this has been awesome. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and Joe, to talk about your journey, to share it with our audience and with the public, both here on video and on audio and our podcast. This has been awesome. I mean, we've been talking for almost 50 minutes here, which seems like, we've been talking for 3 hours. But I have truly enjoyed this conversation about your journey. And I really appreciate both you guys being so upfront and honest with our audience, because these are the stories that we need to harness and we need to bring to the table. And we need to let people know that it's okay. It's okay to, and what you guys are doing is so powerful in overcoming this stigma of this disease. So thank you for being our guest today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So last thing, if our audience, I hope they take me up on this when I say this and take you up on it. If our audience wants to connect with you, maybe there's someone out there that just got diagnosed, maybe their mom, their dad, their sibling, someone in their family, and they want to connect and they want to talk to you guys further about your journey. Where's the best place for them to do that?
They can email me.
What's that email? Let's give it to them.
It is JEWELZZPA1@yahoo.com. Like, did you get that?
We got it. We got
okay.
it.
My cat finger's going off.
That's all right. That's all right. Julie and Joe, it's been a pleasure to have you on the Project Purple podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a wrap of another episode of the Project Purple podcast. If you like what you hear today, feel free to share this episode. Follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on our YouTube channel. Until next time, please be safe. Thank you for listening.